On a crisp October afternoon in Lafayette Square, Washington, D.C., Dr. Annalise Stratton was cited for feeding pigeons by Officer Calloway of the United States Park Police. What began as a supposed violation of a minor city ordinance, a simple act of a woman sharing her lunch with birds on a park bench, escalated into a targeted harassment captured on a dozen cell phone cameras. The officer, entirely unaware he was confronting a member of the House Judiciary Committee, would soon find his career, his pension, and his public reputation hanging by the very thin thread of his own ingrained prejudice. This is the anatomy of that encounter, a moment that exposed the chasm between the authority one wears on a uniform and the power one carries in their voice. The air in Lafayette Square held the first real bite of autumn, a coolness that promised an end to the city's sweltering humidity. Dr. Annalise Stratton, known to her constituents and colleagues as Congresswoman Stratton, savored it from her perch on a worn green bench facing the White House. She had loosened the silk scarf at her neck, the deep burgundy a stark contrast to her simple cream-colored trench coat. To any casual observer, she was just another professional woman stealing a moment of quiet solitude, a lawyer, perhaps, or a consultant from one of the lobbying firms on K Street. She was deliberately anonymous, a state of being she cherished in these rare, stolen moments between committee hearings and constituent calls. In her hand were the last remnants of a flaky croissant she'd bought from a small bakery near her office. She broke off a tiny piece and tossed it onto the cobblestones at her feet. Instantly, a small coterie of pigeons descended, their iridescent necks bobbing with greedy enthusiasm. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. It was a simple, grounding act. It reminded her of sitting with her grandfather in Baltimore, a man who believed that kindness to the smallest of creatures was a measure of a person's soul. She was lost in this quiet reverie when a shadow fell over her. She didn't look up immediately, assuming it was just another tourist passing by. But the shadow lingered, heavy and expectant. "Ma'am," the voice was sharp, edged with an impatience that felt entirely out of place in the tranquil park. Annalise looked up. The man standing before her was a park police officer, his uniform crisply pressed, his posture a rigid wall of authority. His name tag read Calloway. He was looking down at her, not with the neutral curiosity of law enforcement, but with a palpable, pre-packaged disdain. His eyes flicked from her face to the pigeons at her feet, and a sneer tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You know it's against park regulations to feed the wildlife," he stated. It wasn't a question or a polite reminder. It was an accusation already delivered with its verdict. Annalise maintained her calm demeanor, a skill honed over years of contentious debate on the House floor. She gestured with the small piece of croissant still in her hand. "Officer, I was under the impression the ordinance pertained to leaving large, unattended quantities of food that could attract rodents. I'm simply sharing a few crumbs from my lunch. I'll be leaving in a moment, and so will they." Her tone was reasonable, respectful. It was the voice she used with everyone, from the president to the janitor who cleaned her office. Officer Calloway was not impressed. In his eyes, he saw a black woman talking back, trying to be clever. He saw defiance where there was only clarification. "Don't try to lecture me on the law, ma'am," he said, his voice dropping into a condescending drawl. "I'm the one with the badge. I'm the one who enforces the rules in this park. And the rule is no feeding the animals." It's not complicated. He took a step closer, invading her personal space, a classic intimidation tactic. "Now, I'm going to need to see some identification." Annalise's smile faded completely. The brief moment of peace was shattered, replaced by a familiar, weary tension that settled in her bones. This was no longer about pigeons. She knew, with a certainty born of a lifetime of such encounters, that this was about something else entirely. "With all due respect, officer," she said, her voice still level, "for what purpose do you require my identification? Are you issuing me a citation for these crumbs?" He smirked. "I might be. Depends on your attitude. An attitude like that, it tells me you might have other things to hide. People who have nothing to hide don't argue with a police officer. They comply." He rested a hand on the butt of his service weapon, a gesture that was both casual and menacing. The air grew colder. Around them, the rhythm of the park began to shift. A young man sitting on a nearby bench, headphones around his neck, subtly angled his phone in their direction. An older couple, who had been admiring the rose garden, stopped and watched, their expressions troubled. The public square was becoming a silent theater, and Calloway was playing the lead role, emboldened by the audience he believed would see a cop doing his job. Annalise did not rise to the bait. She had faced down hostile witnesses in hearings and stared down political opponents in live debates. An arrogant officer in a park was not going to break her composure. "Officer," she began again, her voice taking on a new precision, "my attitude is not a legal basis for demanding my papers. If you intend to issue a formal warning, you've done so. If you intend to write a citation for a civil infraction under D.C. Municipal Regulation Title 24, I will accept it. But you need to state your intention. Your current line of questioning feels less like enforcement and more like harassment." The word harassment hit him like a physical slap. His face flushed a deep, angry red. "Harassment? Lady, you are 2 seconds away from finding out what real trouble is. Now I'm not asking you again. Give me your ID." He pointed a thick finger at her purse. Now his voice was a low growl, meant to terrify. Annalise felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, but she forced it down. Emotion was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Letting him see her angry would only confirm his narrative. Instead, she channeled it into an icy, unshakable calm. "And I will ask you again, Officer Calloway," she said, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "What is the specific, articulable criminal suspicion that justifies this demand? Because if you don't have one, this becomes an unlawful stop. And if you persist, it becomes a violation of my Fourth Amendment rights." Calloway actually laughed, a short, barking sound of disbelief. "Oh, a jailhouse lawyer. That's rich. You think quoting a TV show at me is going to work? You people always think you know the law better than us." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "Listen to me. I am the law out here. Your rights are what I say they are. And right now, I'm saying you're refusing to identify yourself to a federal officer. That's obstruction, a felony. So, for the last time, before I pull you off that bench and cuff you in front of all these nice people, show me your ID." The threat was naked, ugly. He wanted to humiliate her. He wanted to make an example of her. He glanced around at the watching faces, a triumphant look in his eye. He was in control. He had the gun, the badge, the uniform. She had nothing. Or so he thought. From the corner of her eye, Annalise saw it clearly now. At least 3 phones were out, their small black lenses silently recording. The tourist, a young woman with pink hair, was holding her device with a steady hand, her expression one of grim determination. The older man had his phone partially concealed by his newspaper. They were her witnesses. They were the jury. Annalise took a slow, deliberate breath. It was time to end this. "You want to arrest me for obstruction?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You want to put a United States Congresswoman in handcuffs for feeding birds in Lafayette Square? I would strongly advise against that course of action, Officer." Calloway froze mid-sneer. The words hung in the air, absurd and unbelievable to him. He stared at her simple coat, her unassuming posture. He saw a lie, a desperate, pathetic bluff. "Eh, what?" he scoffed, recovering his bravado. "A congresswoman? Yeah, right. And I'm the King of England. Lady, your story is getting more ridiculous by the second. That's it. I'm done playing games. Stand up. Put your hands behind your back." He reached for her arm, his fingers preparing to bite into her coat sleeve. It was the final escalation, the point of no return. "Officer, I would advise you not to touch me," Annalise said. Her voice had shed all warmth, all attempt at reason. It was now pure, cold steel. It was the voice that could silence a room of 100 powerful people. Calloway hesitated for a fraction of a second, a flicker of doubt finally piercing his armor of certainty. In that moment, Annalise reached into her handbag. She didn't move quickly or furtively. Her movements were slow, measured, broadcasting her every intent. Calloway's hand instinctively went back to his weapon. "What are you reaching for?" he demanded, his voice tight with adrenaline. "My identification," she said calmly, "since you have unlawfully insisted upon seeing it. I am providing it to you under protest, and this entire interaction, including your threats and your unconstitutional demands, is being noted." She pulled out a small, dark blue leather wallet. It was not a civilian wallet. It was sleek, professional, and bore a small, embossed seal on the front. Calloway watched, his eyes narrowed, still convinced this was some kind of trick. She didn't open it to a plastic driver's license with a bad photo. She flipped it open to reveal a gold-embossed credential, shimmering in the afternoon sun. On one side was her photograph, professional and serious. On the other, in bold, authoritative text, were the words that would detonate Officer Calloway's world. United States House of Representatives. The Honorable Annalise Stratton. Maryland, 7th District. Member of Congress. Time seemed to stop. The ambient noise of the park, the distant traffic, the chatter of tourists, the rustle of leaves, all faded into a dull roar in Calloway's ears. The body cam footage, which would later be analyzed frame by Internal Affairs, would show the exact moment the blood drained from his face. His confident smirk collapsed into a slack-jawed gape of horror. His complexion, already ruddy, turned a pasty, sickly white. He looked from the gleaming ID to her face, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the unwavering strength in her posture. He didn't see a "you people" anymore. He saw a person who held a power he couldn't comprehend, a power that didn't come from a gun and a badge, but from the will of 700,000 voters. The young woman with the pink hair audibly gasped and pushed the record button on her phone with a decisive tap, zooming in on the ID. The murmurings from the small crowd of onlookers swelled. "Oh my God," someone whispered. "He's done for," Calloway stammered, his tongue suddenly thick and useless in his mouth. That can't be real. It's a fake." The accusation was weak, pathetic, a last gasp of denial from a drowning man. Annalise Stratton slowly closed the wallet with a soft, final snap. "Is it, Officer Calloway?" she asked, her voice dripping with an irony so bitter it could curdle milk. "Would you like to run my credentials? I'm sure your dispatcher can verify them. Or perhaps you'd prefer to call your watch commander directly. I have his number in my contacts. In fact, I believe I have a meeting scheduled with the chief of the park police next Tuesday. We're set to discuss departmental budget appropriations and community relations protocols. I am certain he will be fascinated to hear a field report on how those protocols are being implemented." She held his gaze, her eyes like chips of flint. She wasn't angry anymore. She was something far more formidable. She was focused. Every word was a perfectly aimed arrow, striking deep into the heart of his crumbling authority. "You see, officer," she continued, her voice clear and carrying to the listening ears around them. "I sit on the House Judiciary Committee. That committee has direct oversight of federal law enforcement agencies. Agencies like the United States Park Police, your department. So when I raise a concern about an officer attempting an unlawful arrest, threatening a citizen, and operating from a place of clear racial bias, that concern doesn't just go into a suggestion box. It goes into the official congressional record." Calloway began to tremble. It was a slight, almost imperceptible tremor at first, but it was growing. He looked around wildly, at the phones, at the disapproving faces of the public. He was no longer the enforcer. He was the spectacle. His power had evaporated, exposed as a hollow shell. The uniform that had made him feel 10 feet tall now felt like a lead weight, dragging him down. "Ma'am, Congresswoman," he finally choked out, the honorific tasting like ash in his mouth. I apologize. There has been a terrible misunderstanding." Annalise stood up from the bench, her full height still several inches shorter than his, yet she seemed to tower over him. "There is no misunderstanding, officer," she said, her voice cutting through his pathetic excuses. "Let's be very clear about what happened here. You saw a black woman sitting peacefully on a park bench. You did not see a citizen enjoying her day. You saw a problem to be managed. You assumed ignorance, so you were condescending. You assumed inferiority, so you were dismissive. You assumed criminality, so you escalated. You did not listen to my words. You only listened to the prejudice in your own head. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. You made a choice to treat me this way." Just then, a police cruiser, its lights off, pulled up quietly to the curb. A supervisor, a sergeant with weary eyes and salt and pepper hair, got out. He had likely received a frantic call from a witness, someone who recognized the Congresswoman or simply the injustice of the situation. The sergeant's eyes took in the scene in an instant. The cluster of people with their phones out, Officer Calloway's ghost-white face, and the calm, commanding presence of Congresswoman Stratton. He knew, instantly, that this was a catastrophe. "Congresswoman Stratton," the sergeant asked, his voice cautious and respectful. "Is there a problem here?" Before Annalise could answer, Calloway turned to his superior, a desperate plea in his eyes. "Sarge, I was just—" She was feeding the pigeons, and the sergeant held up a hand, silencing him. He didn't even look at Calloway. His full attention was on the Congresswoman. "Ma'am, I am Sergeant Reynolds. I am deeply sorry for any disturbance." Annalise gave the sergeant a curt nod. "Sergeant Reynolds, your officer here has just threatened to arrest me for obstruction of justice after I questioned the legality of his demand for my identification for the supposed infraction of sharing crumbs with birds. He has conducted himself with a level of unprofessionalism and aggression that I find deeply disturbing." She looked back at Calloway, who flinched as if she had struck him. He did not de-escalate. He did not listen. He chose to intimidate and threaten. "I want his name, his badge number, and I want to file a formal complaint." Immediately, Sergeant Reynolds nodded, his expression grim. "Of course, Congresswoman. Right away. Calloway, you're on administrative duty, effective immediately. Hand me your notepad." Now Calloway, looking utterly defeated, fumbled with his equipment, his hands shaking so badly he could barely unclip his notepad. The transfer of the small book from his hand to the sergeant's was a symbolic transfer of all power and control. He was no longer an officer in charge. He was evidence in an investigation. The fallout was swift and merciless, exactly as Annalise had known it would be. By the evening news cycle, the story was everywhere. The cell phone videos, uploaded from a half-dozen different angles, had gone viral. The clips were damning, showing Calloway's escalating aggression and Annalise's remarkable restraint. The contrast was impossible to ignore. His snarling condescension versus her calm, precise legal language. His blustering threats versus her quiet, unshakable authority. The headlines wrote themselves. "Racist cop harasses Congresswoman over pigeons. Officer's badge on the line after confronting Judiciary Committee member." The United States Park Police issued a formal apology within hours, stating that Officer Calloway had been suspended without pay pending a full and thorough internal investigation. The statement was filled with boilerplate language about their commitment to unbiased policing and treating all members of the public with dignity and respect, but the words rang hollow against the stark reality of the video evidence. The next day, Annalise Stratton stood before a podium packed with microphones, the cameras flashing like a summer lightning storm. She did not look triumphant. She looked tired, but resolute. "Yesterday, I was subjected to an experience that is, tragically, all too common for Black and brown people in this country," she began, her voice steady and strong. "The only thing that made my experience different is that I had a congressional ID in my purse. I had a title that forced an abusive officer to stop and see me as a person with power. But what about the millions of others who do not have that privilege? What about the young man who gets pulled over for no reason, the woman who is profiled while shopping, the family that is treated with suspicion in their own neighborhood? Their dignity is not dependent on a title. Their rights are not granted by a credential. They are inherent. They are inalienable." She leaned forward, her eyes finding the central camera lens. "The actions of this one officer are not the result of a single bad apple. They are the symptom of a diseased system. Officer Calloway felt emboldened to act that way because the system has, for too long, protected and even encouraged such behavior. This incident is not about me. It is about accountability. And my colleagues and I on the Judiciary Committee will be using this moment to redouble our efforts to pass meaningful police reform, to ensure that no citizen's rights are dependent on the mood or the bias of the officer they happen to encounter." 2 weeks later, the investigation concluded. Officer Calloway was fired. The official reason was multiple violations of departmental policy, including conduct unbecoming an officer and violation of civil rights. His career in law enforcement was over. He had become a pariah, a meme, a cautionary tale. A few weeks after that, on another crisp autumn day, Annalise Stratton once again found herself on that same bench in Lafayette Square. She wore the same coat, the same scarf. She had a croissant in her hand. Deliberately, she broke off a piece and tossed it to the ground. The pigeons, ever hopeful, flocked to her feet. She sat there for a long time, watching them, feeling the cool breeze on her face. A few people recognized her and gave her small, respectful nods, but no one bothered her. The power she had used that day was not something she celebrated. It was a tool she had been forced to wield to demand the basic respect she should have been given freely. The real victory, she knew, wouldn't come from a single firing. It would come when a black woman could sit on a park bench, sharing her lunch with the birds, and be seen not as a problem, but simply as a person, enjoying a moment of peace.